Have you ever experienced a loss so profound that it felt like the very ground beneath your feet disappeared, and suddenly you were free falling into a void you couldn't see the bottom of? A kind of loss that doesn't just break your heart, but erases everything you once understood about life, yourself and your place in the world. I have. And that moment when everything I knew was stripped away became the beginning of something far deeper than I could have imagined. My name is Jason Carter, and this is the story of how grief shattered my world before a near-death experience rebuilt it in a way I never thought possible. When I was 5 years old, my father died in a tragic work accident. One moment he was there, my protector, my hero, my guide, and the next he was gone. At that age, I didn't have the words for what I was feeling. I only knew that something permanent had broken inside me. The world suddenly felt bigger, colder, and far less safe. My father had always been the one who made sense of the chaos around me. Without him, I was exposed, vulnerable, alone. It wasn't just that I lost him, it was that I lost the reality he had helped create for me. I remember the day of the funeral, standing beside my mother, watching people cry and whisper. But none of it made sense. I kept waiting for him to walk through the door, to pick me up and say it was all a bad dream. That moment never came. From that point on, my life became a long, drawn-out question. Why? Why did this happen? Why to him? Why to me? And although people tried to comfort me, their words felt hollow. The truth was nothing could fill the space he left behind. That grief stayed with me. It didn't just fade as I got older. It evolved, it embedded itself into everything I did. Everything I felt, I began to live my life in pieces, always trying to make sense of the hole that had been ripped open in my chest. As I grew up, the world kept moving around me. School friends, milestones, but I moved through it like a ghost. I laughed when I was supposed to. I played, I smiled, I functioned. But deep inside, I was still that 5-year-old boy, standing at the edge of a world that no longer made sense. The years passed and I tried to find solid ground. I looked for it in books, in friendships, in schoolwork. I even looked for it in religion, hoping that some higher explanation could make the pain easier to carry. But nothing ever fully reached that place inside me that had gone numb the day my father died. I felt like a ship without a compass, sailing through fog, unable to tell whether I was moving forward or in circles. I didn't realize it then, but I was searching for something more than answers. I was searching for myself. Losing a parent at such a young age isn't just about the absence of love or care. It's about the loss of identity. My father had been the anchor of who I was, and when that anchor was ripped away, I started drifting quietly and visibly. I wore the mask of a functioning boy, then teenager, then man. But behind that mask was a quiet desperation. I didn't know who I was, and I didn't know how to find out. The grief had become part of my DNA. It shaped the way I saw the world, the way I trusted people, the way I hoped. The emptiness grew heavier as I got older. I achieved things, I got married, I even had a daughter of my own. But the joy always came with a shadow. Every happy moment reminded me of what I didn't have. When I held my daughter for the first time, I cried. Not just from love, but from the aching realization that my father would never meet her, that he would never see me as a father, that he would never say he was proud of me, and that weight, that constant pull of sadness, never really went away. What I didn't know was that this unrelenting grief was preparing me for something I never saw coming. It was building within me a sensitivity, a depth, a longing that would one day open a door I didn't even know existed. And it would happen, not during a moment of joy or clarity, but during a moment when I came closer to death than I had ever imagined. My near-death experience would become the key to everything I had been searching for, not just closure, not just healing, but a complete transformation of how I understood life, death, and myself. Before that, though, I wandered in the dark. I spent years pretending I was okay. I got good at performing normal. But grief isn't something you leave behind. It's something you carry like a stone in your pocket. Some days you forget it's there. Other days it weighs so heavily that you can barely stand up straight. I found myself asking the same questions over and over. Why did this happen? What does it mean? Is there any point to all this suffering? Those questions haunted me. They chased me into adulthood, into fatherhood, into every quiet moment I tried to escape them. I didn't have a language for the pain I felt, and even if I did, I wasn't sure anyone would understand. But deep down, I started to suspect that maybe the grief wasn't just there to torment me. Maybe it was there to teach me something. Maybe, just maybe, it was the very thing that would open the path I was meant to walk. The memory of my father faded with time, but the ache remained sharp. His absence shaped everything about me, my fears, my dreams, my values. I still spoke to him sometimes in the silence of my mind, asking for guidance I never knew how to receive. I still searched the night sky, wondering if he could see me, if he could hear the questions I was too afraid to ask anyone else. And as the years went on, my heart quietly broke in more ways than one. But something inside me refused to give up. A small, flickering light kept urging me forward. And then decades after his death, that light became something more. It became a hand reaching out during the darkest night of my life. It came during a moment when my body failed and my spirit left the earth, and it brought with it the answers I had spent a lifetime chasing. That moment, my near-death experience, didn't erase my grief, but it transformed it. It showed me that everything I had lost wasn't truly gone. It was simply waiting to be seen with new eyes. If you've ever felt the kind of grief that empties you out and leaves you wondering if you'll ever feel whole again, I want you to know this, that emptiness is not the end of your story. It might just be the beginning. For many years after my father's death, I walked around with a hollow inside me that no one could see. People assumed I was fine because I smiled at the right times, answered politely, showed up where I was supposed to. But underneath the surface, there was something missing. A warmth, a compass, a sense that the world was safe, and yet buried beneath the grief and confusion was a memory, a soft glowing memory I barely understood. Something that had happened before the pain took over. Something I had forgotten how to believe in. I was 5 years old, lying in bed one quiet night. The house was still, the kind of stillness that blankets everything when everyone is asleep and no one is dreaming yet. I couldn't fall asleep. I remember the ceiling, the faint sound of my parents' voices through the walls, and then something shifted. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. There was a light, subtle at first, like a soft shimmer in the air, not from a lamp or a window, but from nowhere and everywhere at once. It was warm, not in temperature, but in presence, like kindness had taken shape. It pulsed, almost as if it had a heartbeat, and then slowly it began to descend. My breath caught. I didn't know what it was, only that it didn't scare me. It felt like peace itself was reaching out to touch me. The light moved closer, changing shape as it came down. What had been an orb slowly became something more human. A hand, a glowing, luminous hand made of light and love, and something I still don't have the words for. It hovered above my own small hand, and when it touched me, I felt something unlock deep inside my chest. It wasn't like anything I had ever known. It wasn't just a feeling, it was a knowing. A moment of pure, unconditional safety, as if the universe itself leaned down and whispered, "You are not alone." I laughed. I couldn't stop myself, not because something was funny, but because something inside me had burst open like joy had been stored up for too long and was finally allowed to breathe. I stood in my crib and grabbed the rails with both hands, shaking them with the kind of energy only a child could summon. I laughed so loudly my parents rushed into the room. They asked what was going on. I tried to tell them, but how could I explain that something divine had touched me, that the light itself had come down just to let me know I was seen? They assumed I'd had a vivid dream. They tucked me in, kissed my forehead, and left the room, but the light didn't leave me. Not entirely. As time passed, life became heavier. My father died. The laughter became less frequent. The memory of the light began to fade like a dream, dissolving in the morning sun, but it never fully disappeared. It lingered at the edge of my consciousness, a silent, glowing witness to the storm I was learning to survive. Sometimes I would catch a glimpse of it in the corner of my mind, but I told myself it had just been my imagination. After all, that's what everyone else seemed to believe. Still, I couldn't forget how it made me feel. That moment with the light was the first time in my life I felt something bigger than myself, something wiser, gentler, infinite. But as grief consumed me, that connection began to feel out of reach. I stopped talking about it. I buried it with all the other things I didn't know how to make sense of. But the truth is that moment had never left me. It had simply gone quiet, waiting for me to remember it again. And years later I would, because that light would return in a way I never could have expected. The near-death experience I would have at 56 didn't come out of nowhere. It was the culmination of a lifetime of searching for something I had already known as a child, something I had forgotten I was even looking for. And when my body broke down, when my heart stopped beating, when I left the physical world and entered that realm beyond time and space, it wasn't unfamiliar. It was home, and I recognized it instantly because I had seen it once before in that room in that crib, under that ceiling filled with stars I couldn't yet name. The glowing hand, the warmth, the peace, it all came back in waves, and this time I understood. It hadn't been a dream, it had been real. More real than anything else. That night in my childhood wasn't a random vision, it was a promise, a seed planted in the soil of my soul waiting for the right season to bloom. My near-death experience didn't introduce me to something new. It reminded me of something ancient, something I had always carried inside. After I came back, I began to reflect on why the light had visited me that night, why it had chosen a 5-year-old boy who would soon face the greatest loss of his life. And the answer, as strange as it sounds, came to me. Not in words, but in presence. The light had come not to prevent the pain, but to prepare me for it, to show me, before I was shattered, that I was more than my body, more than my grief, more than the tragedies that would follow. It had given me a glimpse of the eternal, so I could survive the temporary. And survive I did, though, for years. I didn't know that's what I was doing. I thought I was just existing, putting one foot in front of the other. But looking back, I see it clearly now. I was walking towards something, or maybe it was walking toward me. Either way, that night had started the journey, a quiet, invisible thread tying my soul to the truth that we are not alone, that love is real, that light is real, and that no matter how much darkness life throws at us, we carry something inside that cannot be extinguished. So when I finally had my near-death experience decades later, when I left this world for a moment and entered that sacred place, I didn't feel fear. I felt recognition. I remembered who I was. I remembered the hand, the laughter, the love. And I knew that the story hadn't started in that hospital room. It had started long before. It had started with a whisper of light in the night and a little boy who dared to believe that he was being touched by something holy. Growing up without my father felt like walking through a world with a piece of my soul missing a piece no one else could see or understand. Everyone around me continued on with life, birthdays, school dances, graduation, but I moved through those moments as if watching from behind a pane of glass. I could mimic joy, mimic connection, but inside I felt hollow. The loss of my father didn't just steal the man I loved, it stole the reflection of myself I had once seen in his eyes. And without that reflection, I didn't know who I was anymore. People talked about healing, about time making things better, but time didn't heal anything for me. It only thickened the fog. I would stare at my own face in the mirror and feel like a stranger. There was a boy looking back, but I didn't know what he believed in or what kind of man he was supposed to become. The one person who might have helped me figure that out was gone. As I entered my teenage years, that sense of disconnection only grew deeper. I wasn't just grieving my father anymore, I was grieving myself. While other kids my age were worried about parties or dating, I found myself drawn to the sky. I'd lie on the hood of an old car in our backyard, staring up at the stars, wondering where he had gone. I wasn't looking for heaven. I didn't even know what that meant anymore. I was just trying to find something that made sense, some proof that there was more to life than what we could touch. And every time I closed my eyes under that infinite sky, I felt the echo of something I had seen before, something that had once touched my crib, like a hand made of light. But as I got older, the memory of that light became harder to trust. The world didn't make space for miracles. My questions about death, about the soul, about what happens after we leave this body, they were met with blank stares or polite deflection. Adults didn't want to talk about those things. Teachers told me to focus on math. Friends told me to loosen up. My mother, bless her heart, tried to reassure me that my father was in a better place. But what did that mean? Where was this better place, and why did it feel so far away from where I was? I began to doubt my own memories. Maybe the light had just been a dream. Maybe I was making it all up, trying to comfort myself with a fantasy. But then I'd remember how it felt. The warmth, the joy, the laughter that had come out of me like a waterfall. That wasn't pretend, that was real. It was more real than anything I had ever known. And deep down, I knew it had meant something. I just didn't know what. Not yet. The older I became, the more desperately I searched for meaning. I read philosophy, watched documentaries about consciousness and near-death experiences, and devoured books that talked about energy, spirit, and the interconnectedness of all things. I wasn't trying to be enlightened. I was trying to survive. I needed something to hold on to, something that could explain the pain I carried, the longing I felt, and the memory I couldn't let go of. But no matter how many books I read or theories I explored, nothing filled the hole inside me. I needed more than knowledge. I needed understanding. At the same time I tried to build a life, I graduated, got a job, fell in love. I married Melanie, the only person who ever saw through the mask I wore. With her, I allowed myself to hope. Maybe I could create something new, something whole. Maybe, just maybe, I could be the father I never had for someone else. And when our daughter Emma was born, I thought that moment might finally heal me. I held her in my arms and felt love so powerful it made me weep. But even in that beauty, I could feel the shadow of my father. I could feel the ache. And worse, I could feel the fear. What if I failed her? What if I left her the way he had left me? Not by choice, but by fate. That thought haunted me every day. And it forced me to confront the question I had avoided for so long. Who was I really? Was I just a man shaped by grief, a hollowed-out soul pretending to function? Or was I something more? Someone with a purpose, a path, a calling that went deeper than pain? I started to sense that all the sorrow I'd carried wasn't just mine. That maybe it had been given to me for a reason. That maybe the unanswered questions weren't punishments, but invitations. Invitations to look deeper, to open the door I had locked so tightly after my father's death. I didn't know it then, but I was preparing for a moment that would change everything. A moment when I would no longer be confined to this body, when I would see the truth for myself, not through someone else's words, but through my own eyes. My near-death experience didn't come out of nowhere. It was the answer to a question I'd been asking my whole life. Why do I feel so lost? The answer, it turns out, wasn't in books or sermons. It was in the silence, the stillness, the surrender. And when the time came when my body gave out and I slipped into that other realm, I finally understood. But before that moment, I had to keep searching. I had to keep waking up in the middle of the night with my heart pounding, wondering if I was crazy for still remembering a hand made of light. I had to keep pretending I was okay when people asked how I was doing. I had to keep trying to find myself in a world that didn't seem to recognize me. And through it all, I held on to that one memory. The light in the nursery, the laughter, the touch, and I prayed in my own broken way that it would one day make sense. And it did. My journey through grief wasn't just about losing my father. It was about losing myself and finding the courage to go looking for the person I used to be. The boy who believed in light. The boy who laughed without reason. The boy who was touched by something eternal. My identity was never really lost. It was just waiting for me to remember who I was before the world told me what I wasn't. For a while, I thought building a family of my own would be the answer. I believed that if I could give love the way I longed to receive it, maybe it would fill the emptiness. Maybe fatherhood would redeem what had been taken from me. And in the beginning, it felt like that. Melanie and I built a life with careful hands. We didn't have much, but we had each other. And when our daughter Emma was born, I felt something break open inside me. Not in pain this time, but in wonder. Holding her, I felt like I was staring into the eyes of hope itself. She was tiny and fragile and perfect, and for a brief moment, I allowed myself to believe I was whole. But life has a way of testing the very thing you think you've repaired. Emma wasn't like other children. At first, it was easy to explain away. Some babies talk later, walk later. But as the months went by, we started to notice things. She wouldn't respond to her name. She didn't meet our eyes. She struggled to move, the way other toddlers did. I watched her closely, trying to convince myself everything was fine. But my gut knew. My gut had known for a long time. Something wasn't right. The diagnosis came when she was just over a year and a half, Rett syndrome. I remember the room where the doctor said the words. I remember Melanie's hand trembling in mine. I remember feeling like the world had tilted on its axis and we were falling again. Rett syndrome is cruel. It steals your child's abilities one by one. It robs them of their voice, their movement, their freedom, and it demands everything from the parents in return. We were told she might never walk, never talk, never be able to care for herself. I nodded like I understood, but inside I was screaming. I wanted to grab the world by its collar and shake it until it made sense. Hadn't I lost enough already? The grief hit me in waves. I wasn't just mourning the life Emma wouldn't have. I was mourning the father I thought I could be. I wanted to teach her how to ride a bike, to talk about stars and stories, to answer her questions about the world. But now I had to learn a new language, one of seizures, feeding tubes, and medical forms. And the weight of it all pressed down on me like a mountain I couldn't climb. It wasn't just exhaustion. It was heartbreak repeating itself through my own child. And I did not know if I could survive it again. Melanie and I became soldiers in a war we never signed up for. We learned how to suction her airway, how to administer meds during a seizure, how to calm her body when it stiffened like stone. We moved through days in a fog of hospital visits, therapy sessions, and paperwork, and yet in the middle of all that pain, Emma smiled. She smiled in a way that shattered me. Pure, honest, radiant. Even when her body betrayed her, her soul never did. There was light in her eyes, and sometimes in the quiet moments I could feel that light reaching for something beyond us, something bigger. That's when the old memories started to come back. The hand of light, the laughter, the warmth. I began to wonder if Emma had touched that place too. If maybe she still lived half in this world and half in the next. There were moments when she would stare past me, not with confusion but with presence, like she was listening to something I couldn't hear. And I started to believe that maybe she hadn't been given less, but more connection to that eternal space I had once glimpsed as a child and would one day return to during my near-death experience. But even with those sacred thoughts, the struggle was real. Our finances began to crumble under the weight of medical bills. Our social life disappeared. Friends stopped calling. We were too complicated, too hard to relate to. I pulled away from people, not out of anger, but out of weariness. I didn't have the words to explain what it was like to watch your child suffer and not be able to stop it. I didn't have the space to hold anyone else's pain when mine was already overflowing. I became a man of routines, of silent prayers, of quiet desperation. Some nights I would sit alone in Emma's room while she slept, the hum of her oxygen machine, steady in the dark. I'd watch her chest rise and fall, my heart tied to every breath. I'd whisper apologies to her, to God, to the little boy I used to be. I felt like I had failed all of them. I couldn't save my father. I couldn't protect my daughter. And I couldn't even explain why I still believed that light existed somewhere in the middle of all this pain. But I did believe it. I had to, because if I didn't believe in that light, I wouldn't survive. Then something began to shift, not in the world, but in me. It wasn't dramatic. It was subtle, like a sunrise slowly pushing back the night. I began to see that the grief I carried was not just a burden, but a bridge. A bridge between the seen and the unseen, between the man I thought I was and the man I was becoming. Caring for Emma didn't break me. It revealed me. It showed me where my love ended and where something greater began. Something selfless, something sacred. And in her eyes, I began to see glimpses of the divine. Not in spite of her condition, but because of it. Still, I was tired, worn thin by the weight of love and the wounds of the past. My body had begun to show the signs. Pain in my spine, tingling in my arms. Doctor said it was bone spurs pinching the nerves in my neck. I needed surgery. It sounded simple. I thought I'd be back home in a few days. But deep inside, something told me this would be more than just a medical procedure. Something was coming. Something I couldn't explain. I didn't know it yet, but I was about to come face to face with the light again. Not in memory, not in metaphor, but in truth. And this time I wouldn't just glimpse it, I would enter it. My near-death experience wasn't just waiting for me at the edge of a hospital bed. It had been waiting all along in the quiet moments, the sleepless nights, the tears wiped from Emma's cheek. It had been building, growing, preparing me for the moment when everything I had lived would finally make sense. The surgery was supposed to be simple. That's what the doctors told me. A quick procedure to shave down the bone spurs in my neck that had been compressing the nerves. They said it would relieve the chronic pain I'd been living with for years. A few nights in the hospital, a couple of weeks of rest at home, and I'd be back on my feet. I wanted to believe them. I needed to. My body had carried so much for so long. Stress, sorrow, duty. It was finally breaking down. But even as I signed the consent forms and nodded along to their reassurances, something inside me whispered, this isn't just about your body. Something deeper is about to happen. The operation went as planned. Melanie picked me up the next morning and we returned to our quiet home in North Carolina. The pain was manageable. I was hopeful. I thought maybe finally the physical weight I had been carrying would begin to lift. But on the third night after surgery, everything changed. I remember lying in bed, the room dim, Melanie dozing in the chair beside me. The house was still, but inside me, something had begun to churn. A sharp, sudden pain exploded in my chest. It was unlike anything I'd ever felt. Not just pressure, not just discomfort. It was agony, fierce and consuming. I gasped, my hands clutching at the blanket as my vision blurred. I tried to call out, but my voice came out strangled, caught between panic and pain. Melanie stirred just in time to see me convulsing, my body trembling uncontrollably, my face pale and slick with sweat. She rushed to my side, her voice rising with fear as she called 911. I faded in and out the world around me, folding in like waves crashing over my head. The paramedics arrived fast and calm, but I could feel myself slipping. My heart was racing, then stopping, then sputtering like an engine running out of fuel. In the ambulance, I caught glimpses of flashing lights and desperate voices, but they seemed far away like echoes from a dream. I could no longer hold on. Something inside me let go. And just like that, I left. I don't mean that metaphorically. I left my body. One moment I was in pain, tethered to flesh and fear. The next I was floating in a silence so profound it felt like music. There was no ceiling above me, no floor beneath me, no walls, just space, just light, and it wasn't empty. It was full alive with presence, with energy, with something that felt more real than anything I had ever touched. I had entered a realm beyond language, beyond thought. This was the beginning of my near-death experience. I wasn't afraid. That surprised me. I had always imagined death to be terrifying, cold, dark, lonely. But what I felt was the opposite. I was surrounded by warmth, by peace, by an intelligence that held me without judgment. There was no voice yet. I was being spoken to. No shape yet. I was being embraced. I felt known, completely. Every pain I had ever felt, every doubt I had ever carried, every moment I had believed I wasn't enough, it all melted in that light. There was no shame, no guilt, just understanding. I could see my life not as a sequence of memories, but as a single flowing thread, woven with others, connected, interdependent. I saw how the love I gave had rippled out in ways I never imagined. I saw how even my smallest kindness had touched people. But I also saw the hurt I had caused, the times I'd pulled away, the moments when fear had made me shut down, and yet none of it condemned me. It was just truth. Beautiful, painful, sacred truth, and I was invited to look, to feel, to forgive. There were others there, though, not in the way you might expect, soul's presences. Familiar in essence, though not bound to the bodies I had known. I didn't see my father's face, but I felt him. The weight of his absence lifted as I realized he had never been gone. He had simply moved into another form, another place, and had been walking beside me all along. I wept without tears because I had no eyes. I sang without sound because I had no voice. But the joy I felt vibrated through me like light made into music. This place, this space, it was home. Time didn't exist there. Minutes didn't pass. Days didn't fade. Everything was now eternal present. And in that eternal wow, I understood things I had chased my whole life. I understood why I had lost my father. I understood why Emma had been given to me the way she was. I understood that none of it was random. That grief wasn't a curse. It was a doorway. That pain wasn't punishment. It was a teacher. Everything had been guiding me here. Every shadow had pointed toward this light. But even as I merged deeper into that realm, I began to feel something pulling. A soft tug like a breeze shifting direction. I knew what it meant. I wasn't done. There was more for me to do, more to say, more to give. The choice wasn't forced. I could have stayed. I could have drifted into that eternal embrace and let go of everything. But I remembered Melanie's hand in mine. I remembered Emma's eyes. I remembered the promise I had once made to be present, to be loved, to be whole. And I knew I had to go back. The return wasn't dramatic. It was like waking up slowly from the most vivid dream of your life when you didn't want to leave. I felt my body again. Heavy, weak, broken. I heard the beeping of machines, the muffled voices of nurses, the soft crying of my wife. I opened my eyes. The light was gone, but its imprint was etched inside me. I had left the world and I had come back. But I would never be the same. My near-death experience didn't just show me what happens after we die. It showed me how to live. And in that sacred space between breaths, between heartbeats, I found the truth I had spent a lifetime seeking. Even now, when I close my eyes and allow the noise of the world to fade, I can still feel it. That place, that presence, that light. The memory of it is more than a memory. It's a knowing. A thread stitched into the very fabric of my being after my near-death experience. I didn't just come back with a story. I came back changed permanently, as if some ancient truth had been carved into my bones. What I experienced in that moment beyond life wasn't imagination. It wasn't a hallucination. It was the deepest reality I've ever touched when I was there. When my body had failed and my spirit had crossed the veil, I didn't see a tunnel or hear a voice calling me home. Instead, I felt absorbed by something so expansive and alive that words will never do it justice. I didn't travel through space. I became space. I wasn't floating above my body. I was free from the idea of a body altogether. I didn't have a form yet. I had consciousness. I didn't have eyes yet. I could see with clarity that made human sight feel dull in comparison. And what I saw, what I felt was light. It wasn't just light in the visual sense. It was the essence of light, warmth without heat, illumination without direction. It surrounded me and moved through me. At the same time, I wasn't separate from it. I was part of it. There was no edge between where I ended and it began. And in that unity, I felt the presence of something vast and intelligent and deeply loving. Not a person, not a figure on a throne, but a consciousness that was both everywhere and nowhere inside me, and beyond me familiar. Yet infinite, I understood things I had never even thought to ask, not in words, but in knowing. Everything I had ever feared suddenly looked small and almost laughable. Death, loss, failure. They were like shadows cast by a candle in front of the sun. In this space, there was no judgment, no punishment, no list of sins. There was only clarity and compassion. I saw my entire life, not in flashes, but as a woven tapestry. Every moment, every choice, every thought was part of a pattern intricately connected to the lives of others. Nothing was wasted, nothing was meaningless. Even the pain had a purpose. There was one moment, though, that changed me forever. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't accompanied by trumpets or cosmic explosions. It was simple, but it hit me like thunder wrapped in silence. I felt myself being fully seen, completely and utterly known by the light itself, not just the good parts, not just the noble intentions, but all of me, the broken pieces, the selfish decisions, the quiet resentments. I had never spoken aloud. All of it was laid bare, and yet I was not rejected. I was embraced. I realized then that the love I was feeling wasn't conditional. It wasn't love because I had earned it. It wasn't love despite my flaws. It was love that saw through everything into everything and called it worthy. Anyway, that realization broke something open in me. I had spent so much of my life trying to be good enough for my father's memory, for my wife, for my daughter, even for myself. And now here I was with nothing to prove and nowhere to hide. And the light whispered, not in words, but in essence, you already are. I can't tell you how long I was in that place. Time didn't exist there the way it does here. It felt like forever and a moment all at once. But during that eternal now, I was given a choice, not with fanfare or ceremony, just a gentle knowing. I could stay. I could dissolve fully into that light, into that love, and never return to the heavy world of breath and bone. Or I could go back to the pain, to the responsibility, to the unfinished work of being human. It wasn't a command, it was an invitation, a question. And in that moment, I thought of Emma. I thought of her fragile body, her sparkling eyes, her laugh that sounded like bells on a cold morning. I thought of Melanie, of her hands holding mine, of the quiet strength she had carried through years of uncertainty. I thought of every person who might never get to feel what I had just felt, who might go through their entire life believing they were unworthy of love, disconnected from light. And I knew I couldn't stay. Not yet. So I said yes, not with a voice, but with my soul. I chose to return. As the light faded, I felt it press something into me. Not a message, not instructions, but presence. It anchored itself in my chest like a glowing seed, something that would stay with me even after I returned to the world of gravity and noise. That seed was my proof, my compass, my reminder. I hadn't imagined it. I had been there, and I had come back to carry that truth into a world that so easily forgets. When I woke up in the hospital, I was different. The pain was real. My body was weak. My heart was fragile, but my spirit was steady, unshaken. Nurses fluttered around me. Machines beeped beside me. Melanie wept quietly at my side. And in the middle of all that chaos, I smiled. Not because I was no longer afraid of dying, but because I had finally learned how to live. The light didn't erase my grief, it reframed it. It didn't take away my questions, it gave them context. My near-death experience was not the end of anything. It was the beginning of a new chapter 1 where I no longer chased answers outside of myself, but learned to trust what I already knew deep down. That love is the source of everything. That connection is never lost. That even in our darkest hour, the light never leaves us. It waits for us to remember it. And once you've encountered that light, once you've merged with it, nothing is ever the same. I thought the light was the end. I thought that was the peak, the culmination, the full embrace of everything I had ever searched for. But I was wrong. What came next was unexpected, tender, and shattering in a way that only love can be. I was still within the near-death experience when I felt a shift in the space around me, not a change in the light, but in the frequency of the presence. Something familiar was drawing close like a memory-given form. And then I heard a voice, not booming, not distant, but soft like a breeze brushing through tall grass. Jason had said, "It's me." I knew that voice. Even after all these years, I knew it. Frosty, my brother-in-law, my friend, the man who had once laughed with me at family cookouts, who had cried beside me after Emma's diagnosis, who had carried his own pain like a hidden fire until it finally consumed him. He had taken his life months before my heart failed, and I had never truly forgiven myself for not seeing it coming. When he appeared in that space, not in the body I remembered, but as a presence shaped by familiarity and soul, I felt the guilt rise instantly. My first instinct wasn't joy but shame. Shame for what I hadn't said, for not calling him more, for not doing something, anything that might have made him stay. I wanted to speak to apologize, but before I could form the thought, he answered me. "It's okay," he said, though no lips moved. "You don't have to carry that anymore." It was then I realized that in this realm, communication was different. It wasn't words, it was essence. His message entered me like light entering water, effortless, full, complete. And that message was love, pure unfiltered love, not judgment, not correction, just the kind of love that sees you completely and still calls you brother. Frosty had always been a complicated man, charming and troubled, bright and shadowed. He'd battled demons no one could quite name, depression, addiction, regret. We all tried to help him in our own ways, but he wore his sorrow like armor. And when he ended his life, it left a hole in our family that no one could talk about out loud. The silence around his name became heavier than any eulogy, and I carried my share of that weight. I had told myself over and over, maybe I could have changed something, maybe I could have saved him. But here in this space of light, he stood whole. At peace, there was no anguish in his energy, no turmoil, just clarity. And in that clarity, he gave me a gift. I didn't know I needed forgiveness. Not for what I had done, but for what I had felt. "You did love me," he said, and I felt those words inside me like a warm river. You were enough. The tears I cried in that moment didn't fall. They moved through me like light does, cleansing soft, necessary. I realized then that my understanding of death had been too small. I had imagined it as a wall, a final door that locked behind the departing. But it was a veil, a shift, a return, and those who crossed it were not lost but transformed. My near-death experience wasn't just showing me where I was going, it was showing me who had already arrived. Frosty showed me things not in images but in impressions. His pain hadn't vanished when he died. It had been understood. It had been healed, not erased, but held with compassion. He wasn't trapped, he wasn't punished. He wasn't lost in some purgatory. He was embraced, and that truth unraveled the knots in my chest that religion and fear had tied there years ago. I had grown up believing that suicide was a sin that separated the soul from grace. But here was Frosty standing in grace itself, more whole than I had ever seen him. We didn't talk long, not because we ran out of time, but because there was no need. In that space, one moment was enough to heal a lifetime. I told him I loved him, not with my mouth, but with my being, and he said he knew. Then he said something I will never forget. "Take it with you." I didn't understand at first. Take what I asked silently. His answer came like a ripple through my soul. The light, the love, the truth. Don't leave it here, carry it back. And then he was gone. Not gone in the way we think of it, not vanished or erased, but merged. He became part of the light again. And I felt no grief, only gratitude. As I floated in that space surrounded by warmth, I realized the true purpose of my near-death experience. It wasn't just to give me peace. It was to give me mission. To bring back the messages that too many of us have forgotten. That death is not the enemy, that love survives every ending, that forgiveness is always waiting, even when we believe we don't deserve it. I began to feel the pull again, soft, steady, undeniable. My time there was ending. The choice I had made earlier to return was beginning to take shape. I felt my soul preparing for re-entry, for wait, for time, for pain. But I wasn't afraid. I had been to the other side. I had seen the light. I had touched the eternal. and I had spoken with someone I thought I had lost forever. Coming back wasn't just about waking up. It was about remembering what I had seen, what I had felt, and what I had promised to carry. Frosty's visit wasn't just comfort, it was a call, a reminder that we're never truly alone, that the people we love are never as far as we fear, that the soul once known cannot be unknown. When I returned to my body, I brought him with me, not in the flesh, but in memory, in message, in mission. I carry him still, just as I carry the light. And every time I speak about what happened, every time I share my near-death experience, I feel his hand on my shoulder steadying me, reminding me, you are not done, speak the truth. Someone needs to hear it, and so I do. After Frosty faded into the light, I felt something change. Not in the atmosphere around me, but in the depth of awareness within me. It was as if the universe had gently taken me by the hand and said, now it's time. And suddenly, without walking or turning or asking, I was standing. If that word even applies in a space of knowing, there was no screen, no projector, no flashing images like some divine slideshow, but I was shown everything. My life, all of it, from beginning to now. It wasn't chronological, it wasn't linear. It was all happening at once and I was inside it. They call this the life review, but that term doesn't come close to describing what it truly is. This wasn't a list of events. It wasn't a judgment day. It was a revelation. I wasn't just watching what I had done. I was feeling what I had caused. Every word I had spoken, every decision I had made, every time I had looked someone in the eye. I felt it not only from my perspective, but from theirs. When I comforted someone, I felt their relief. When I ignored someone in pain, I felt their loneliness. When I judged, I felt the sting. When I loved, I felt the warmth, not only in myself, but in the one receiving it. I didn't feel condemned, I didn't feel punished, but I did feel truth. Truth without anesthesia. There were moments that brought me pride, small acts I had long forgotten that had created ripples of kindness in ways I never imagined. Holding the door for a stranger, picking up the phone when someone needed to talk, looking my daughter in the eyes and telling her she was strong. These moments mattered more than I ever realized. And yet there were also moments that stung. I had withdrawn out of fear, times I had spoken with sharpness, times I had allowed silence to answer when compassion was needed. But even in those painful recollections, the light didn't turn away. It held me. It stayed. It said, see, not with shame, but with love. There was a gentle urgency in the process, a divine invitation to understand not to be punished, but to grow, to truly awaken to the impact of every thought, every action, every breath. And I realized life is not measured by success or accolades. It's measured by how we make others feel. It's measured by how deeply we show up with love, with presence, with courage. The review wasn't limited to my interactions with people. It reached into the quiet moments, the way I had treated my body, the way I had spoken to myself in the privacy of my mind, the moments I had ignored wonder brushed aside, awe rushed past beauty. I saw how often I had been surrounded by miracles and failed to recognize them. A sunrise I didn't stop to see, a hug I gave out of routine instead of reverence, a breath I took without gratitude. And in those realizations, I wasn't scolded, I was broken open. Not into guilt, but into grace. I asked without words, how could I have lived differently? And the answer came soft and steady. With love, that's all that was ever asked. It wasn't dramatic. It was simple, too simple for the mind, but perfect for the soul. I understood then that this was the true lesson of my near-death experience. Not just the existence of the afterlife, not just the survival of consciousness, but the centrality of love as the core purpose of human existence. That we are here not to accumulate, not to perform, but to love fiercely, quietly, consistently. The review stretched even further. I saw the ripple effects of my choices, not just on people I knew, but on strangers I would never meet. A smile passed along like a thread, a kindness that led someone to treat someone else better, and just as deeply, a moment of impatience that caused someone else to shrink. It was all connected. Everything mattered. Nothing was isolated. We are woven into one another in ways we can't begin to grasp while on Earth. Then came a moment I wasn't expecting. I saw my father not as a ghost, not as a figure walking toward me, but as a pulse of memory, light, and presence. I felt his hand on my shoulder the way I did as a boy. I felt his pride, his forgiveness, his joy. And I realized that even though he had been gone my whole life, his influence had never ceased. The love he gave me in those first 5 years had echoed through every choice I made as a father, a husband, a man. His absence had hurt me, yes, but his love had formed me, and that love had never died. At the end of the review, I wasn't asked to justify anything. I wasn't graded, I wasn't placed on a scale, I was simply asked, "Do you see now?" And I did. I saw how easily we miss the point of life, how we chase success while neglecting connection, how we speak about eternity but forget to honor the present moment. I saw how my own suffering, especially the pain of losing my father and the heartache of raising Emma, had softened me, not broken me, and prepared me to feel the kind of compassion that can only be born from loss, in that space of ultimate understanding. I made another vow, not out loud, but from the core of my being. I vowed that if I returned to my body, I would live differently. I would walk slower, hug longer, listen more deeply, speak more gently. I would look strangers in the eye and see their soul, not just their face. I would love, not because it was easy, but because it was why I had been created. I would live not to escape pain, but to transform it into something beautiful, something useful, something true. The light acknowledged this, not with applause or approval, but with silence, a deep living silence that said, "Then go." I wasn't forced, I wasn't pushed. I was invited to continue my story with this new knowledge, this clarity, this open heart. And as I began to feel the pull again, the slow return to breath and form, I held that vow tight inside me. My near-death experience hadn't ended yet, but it had already done what it came to do. It had helped me remember who I truly was. Coming back wasn't a crash, it wasn't sudden. It was a slow re-entry, like drifting out of a dream you didn't want to leave, like slipping into clothes that no longer quite fit. I felt the light begin to dim, not because it faded, but because my awareness was being pulled elsewhere. My soul had made its choice, I would return. And so the presence I had been immersed in, the all-knowing, all-loving field of light, began to step back, not in distance, but in intensity. I felt a kind of gravity tugging at me, not from the earth, but from my body. That fragile thing I had left behind. It was calling me back. I remember the moment my spirit touched flesh again. It was a jolt, not of pain, but of limitation. The contrast was overwhelming, from infinite light to a body hooked up to machines, from timeless stillness to fluorescent lights and the sterile scent of antiseptic. I couldn't open my eyes yet, but I could feel. My chest ached, not just from surgery or heart failure, but from the weight of being human again. My breath felt shallow, strained as if every inhale had to be earned. And even though I was back, part of me remained suspended between worlds. I heard Melanie's voice before I saw her face. It was cracking with emotion, whispering my name like it was a prayer she'd said 1,000 times. "Jason." "Please," she murmured, her hand clutching mine, as if afraid I would drift away again. I wanted to speak, to reassure her, to tell her everything I had seen, but I couldn't form words yet. I just let her voice wash over me, grounding me in the reality I had returned to. It wasn't the light, but it was love, and that was enough. The days that followed were a blur of doctors, beeping monitors, and exhaustion. The nurses came in and out, checking vitals, adjusting tubes, speaking gently but firmly. I could tell by the way they looked at me that I had almost died. Not metaphorically, literally, and while they marveled at the fact that I was alive, I was still trying to process where I had been. My near-death experience hadn't left me as I was. It had hollowed out the old me and filled me with something new, something ancient, something true. I didn't tell anyone right away. How could I? How do you explain to people that, while your heart stopped, you met the presence that created you, that you saw your entire life through the lens of eternity and chose to come back? Not because you were afraid of death, but because you finally understood life. I held it in at first, not out of secrecy, but out of sacredness. I needed to protect it until I had the strength to carry it properly. But even without words, people noticed something. Melanie told me I looked different. Not just thinner, not just paler, but softer. Calmer, like I had laid something heavy down and picked up something invisible but radiant. And she was right. The anger I used to carry had vanished. The shame, the guilt, the need to control everything. All of it had loosened its grip. I wasn't healed in the physical sense. My body was still weak, still dependent on medication and careful monitoring. But my spirit was steady, anchored in something unshakable. I remember one night still in the hospital watching the shadows on the ceiling as machines hummed beside me. I had been alone for hours, but I didn't feel alone. I felt watched over, not in a paranoid way, but in the way a child feels when they know a parent is nearby. I whispered into the silence, am I really supposed to be here? And somewhere inside, not from outside, came the answer, yes. And now you know why. That why began to take shape over the following weeks. It wasn't a mission in the traditional sense. I wasn't meant to start a religion or write sacred texts. I was meant to live differently, to see differently, to love differently. Every interaction, every conversation, every quiet moment was now charged with purpose. I began to see people, not their roles or flaws, but their light, even when they didn't see it in themselves. When I finally told Melanie what had happened, everything from the light to Frosty's visit to the life review, she cried. Not because she doubted me, but because something in her recognized the truth of it. We had both been carrying so much for so long, and suddenly we weren't carrying it alone. She told me later that something shifted in her that day too. Not just because I survived, but because I came back with light in my eyes that hadn't been there before. Returning to the physical world wasn't easy. There were days when I missed the peace of that other place so much it hurt. Days when I would close my eyes and ache for that warmth, that wholeness. But then Emma would laugh, or Melanie would brush her hand against my cheek, and I'd feel it again. Not in full, not like before, but enough. Enough to remind me that the light wasn't gone. It was here, hidden in the folds of ordinary life, waiting to be noticed. That's what my near-death experience gave me, not just a story to tell, but a lens to see through, a way to walk in the world without forgetting what's beyond it. It taught me that heaven isn't far away. It's layered into this life like music beneath the noise, like light behind the veil. I came back so I could remember. And in remembering, help others remember too. So now, when someone asks me what happened, what I saw when I died, I tell them the truth. I saw love, I saw light, I saw that we are more than what we think we are. And I saw that coming back wasn't a return to limitation, but a return to mission, to love deeper, to live slower, to see clearer, and to never ever forget where I've been. Coming back from death wasn't a return to what I used to be. It was the beginning of something new, something raw and real and entirely reshaped. My near-death experience didn't leave me with flashy revelations or a divine manual. It left me with something quieter but more powerful, a knowing that my life wasn't mine to escape from anymore. It was mine to live, to give, and to illuminate. I remember the first morning after I got home from the hospital. The house was still. Emma was sleeping. Melanie was curled beside her. The light that streamed through the window didn't feel like ordinary light. It felt like the same presence I had just come from. Gentler now, yes, but still full of meaning. I sat in the silence, letting the weight of my return settle in. I didn't feel victorious. I felt humbled, grateful, commissioned. I had crossed the threshold between life and death and returned with one thing I knew I had to carry into every breath that followed. The light must not stay on the other side, I began to speak. Not to crowds at first, not to strangers or stages, but to myself. I whispered my story out loud to the air, to the trees, to the kitchen sink while washing dishes. I needed to rehearse the truth until I could live it, and slowly as the days became weeks, I felt a calling emerge, not loud, not urgent, but insistent. A quiet voice rising in the center of my chest. You were shown, now show others, so I started writing it down. I wrote to remember, to understand, and eventually to share. People reached out. One story led to another. A woman whose son had passed, a man who had survived a crash, a nurse who had seen patients speak of the light just before they died. They didn't need proof. They just needed someone else to say what they'd always suspected, that love is the real language of the universe, and death is not the end of the conversation. I spoke wherever I was invited. Churches, grief circles, rehab centers, even online forums. Not because I had answers, but because I had seen. And when someone has seen, their presence carries a different frequency. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I was trying to wake something up in them, not belief, but memory. The memory of who we are before the noise of the world buries it. I didn't come back to live an easy life. Emma still needs full-time care. There are days when I am physically exhausted, financially strained, emotionally emptied. But now none of that feels like punishment. It feels like purpose. I'm not here to escape suffering. I'm here to walk through it with my eyes open and my heart intact, to recognize the light in every shadow, to speak the truth of the other side in a world that's forgotten how to listen. So I live slowly, I move with attention, I listen to the wind through trees and hear it whisper the same silence I once floated in. I kiss my daughter's forehead and remember the love that never once judged me. In the life review I hold, Melanie's hand not as something I'm lucky to keep, but as something sacred to serve. Every word I say, now every step I take is offered not as performance, but as offering. I don't need to be remembered. I need to remember my mission is not mine alone. If you're hearing this, if my story stirred something in you, then perhaps the same light that found me is speaking to you too. Perhaps you've felt it in a dream, in a near loss, in the ache of longing or the stillness before sleep. Maybe you haven't died, but maybe something inside you has. And maybe now it's ready to come back to life because you don't need to die to wake up. You don't need your heart to stop beating to remember what you're made of. You are not separate from the light. You are not lost in your pain. You are not behind or broken or forgotten. You are part of it. Still always, this is what I came back to say. This is what I was sent to carry. This is the mission of light. And now stepping back from the voice of Jason Carter and speaking to you not as a character, but as the voice behind this channel, I want to say thank you for walking with me through this journey. If this story moved you, if it helped you remember something you thought was lost, I ask you to stay with us. There are more stories, more light, more voices from the edge of life that return bearing truth. Subscribe to this channel if you want to hear more real stories of near-death experiences that awaken and transform. Like this video, if it touched something in you, share it with someone who is grieving, questioning, or quietly searching for something they can't name, and leave a comment. Your story matters too. Your words might be the light someone else needs to find their way home. This isn't the end. It never was. In our next video, we'll explore another near-death experience, one that reveals even more about what waits beyond the veil and what that means for how we live right now. Until then, live gently, listen deeply, and love like the light is already inside you, because it is.